They are some of the best escapist playgrounds in video game history, and I love getting lost in them. Ocarina of Time has a lot of favorites for me. A favorite dungeon, a favorite side quest or two, etc. But bar none, it has one of my favorite gameplay mechanics that I've seen in any video game, and it transcends the medium entirely. The game's namesake. I cannot articulate how important the Ocarina. Darunia has a lot on his mind, and in order to cheer him up, these are the clues you're given. He says, I wanted to hear a tune, something from outside the mountains, something green, natural. That's the kind of music I want to hear. Well, another Goron says, I remember Big Brother used to always listen to the music that comes from the forest. Yes, taken as fact. After all, this is yet another Ocarina of Time retrospective. My voice is bound to be drowned out by the countless other videos about this game. But what I will say is this. A long time has passed since Ocarina of Time was released. Like I said in my Link to the Past video, numerous Zelda games have since released that have done unique things to separate itself from earlier entries. Ocarina is in a similar spot to that. It was the first. Then E3 2017 came along, and our world was turned upside down.
Hard space. There's not a lot. Space.
Blast drive.
Oh my fucking god, are you joking?
Wow! Holy shit! Oh man, are you serious right now?
No. You spend so much time connecting with these people that it becomes incredibly difficult when they join one of thousands of names on a war memorial. Of all the games I've played that represent the consequences of warfare, I think Pikmin does it best. Not only don't have enough time in the day to harvest some chunky pellets, create some sprays out of berries, or bring back a treasure, they'll still be waiting for you in the morning. You can take your sweet time doing whatever you like in this game, and you won't ever be punished for it. Caves don't even have a time limit, but there's a trade-off there that we'll discuss soon. The point is, Pikmin 2 lacks urgency. Some have said that the day limit was removed due to criticism, but in actuality, the behemoth of an enemy that can only be made vulnerable by purple Pikmin. But because you can't bring purple Pikmin into the cave, you need to make it to the final floor and find the candy pop bud to deal any damage to it. It appears randomly, but it makes your time in the cave much scarier no matter how you decide to play. If you try to grab every treasure, you have to spend more time avoiding the water race. But what's next for Pikmin? Well, remember when I was talking about vaporware and the importance of transparency from developers? And that whole 9-year gap between Pikmin 2 and Pikmin 3? Yeah, we're living through that again. And it's much worse now. Pikmin 3 didn't sell very well for a number of reasons. For one, it was on a console that barely anyone cared about. Throughout the console's roughly 5-year lifespan, it sold a measly 13 million units, only outselling the poor old Sega Dreamcast by 3 million, despite having 2 extra years of life. In contrast to the Wii U's 13 million units in 5 years, the Nintendo Switch has sold 32 million units in 2 years, decimating sales records and outselling Nintendo's own GameCube and Nintendo 64. And it's bound to keep going. If Pikmin 3 had been released on the Switch, who knows what would have happened. Even obscure games tend to have a large audience on the Switch, so a first-party Nintendo release should enjoy at least some success no matter what it is. Well, there's no use thinking about what could have been. Pikmin 3 released during that dark era for Nintendo, and there's no changing that. Regardless of all that though, Miyamoto still confirmed that another Pikmin game would be released. As the phenomenal Pikmin short films were released in 2014, Miyamoto said something that gave fans hope. Continually launching campaigns after the release of software will lay the groundwork for the next iteration of Pikmin in the future. And needless to say, we want it to be one of the motivations for potential consumers to purchase a Wii U. We are making a variety of different efforts. A couple of months after that, Miyamoto further reassured fans of Pikmin by saying he still had a lot of ideas. This was similar to what he said in 2007, which was about a year before Pikmin 3 was officially announced. Looks like things weren't slowing down at all, and Miyamoto still felt motivated enough to continue working on the series. Then, a mere 9 months after this interview, he said something that would tear the world asunder. It's actually very close to completion. Pikmin teams are always working on the next one. Okay, so what the heck is he talking about? How does a Pikmin game go from barely being conceptualized to near completion in 9 months? At the time, no one knew what to make of this news. We had seen nothing of the game, and suddenly there's confirmation that it's almost done? Nothing was heard about this game that was supposedly near completion until almost a year later at E3 2016. When Miyamoto was asked about the project, he had this to say: "When we're in development, we have to create a list of priorities, and it has been kind of hard to fit Pikmin 4 into that list. But we're hopefully starting to see that on the list now." Okay, they've had a few setbacks. At the time, the Switch was gearing up for a worldwide launch, and Breath of the Wild needed the development team's full attention. Pikmin 4 would resume development after all this was said and done, right? Well, maybe. Miyamoto said something at E3 2017 that caught my attention. "I've been told not to share anything about this from PR, but I can tell you it is progressing. The part that excites me is that he was told not to say anything. Why would PR have Miyamoto stay tight-lipped on the project if they had nothing to share? Perhaps the game is far enough along that we'll finally see it soon." Well, it's been 2 years since then. As of this video, that's all we've heard from Miyamoto about Pikmin 4. It's ended up in a similar cycle of repetitive answers and subsequent radio silence that Half-Life 2 Episode 3 had faced for years on end. These two games are a case study in what happens when you announce something too far in advance. There's still one question left, though. What was Miyamoto talking about when he said the next Pikmin game was close to completion? Well, hindsight is a tool I'm very grateful to have, because what's most likely here is that he was talking about Hey Pikmin, a spin-off title that was unceremoniously plopped onto the 3DS about 2 years after the interview. This game is not worthy of having a dedicated section in this video, I'm gonna be honest. Hey Pikmin isn't a bad game, but it's pretty unremarkable as a 2D action puzzle game. Combat is laughably bare, and puzzles boil down to having the right Pikmin for the job, or having enough Pikmin for a secret path. It also gives you hand cramps because you have to hold the DS in one hand and the stylus in the other. It's got Kid Icarus Uprising syndrome. Great game, but the control scheme just doesn't work well with the console. I recorded this footage using Citra, as you can probably tell by the mouse cursor I forgot to hide. And that's because playing this game with a keyboard and mouse feels way better. You don't have to grip an entire console with one hand while mashing the touchscreen in the other. But even Citra's superior control schemes can't save this game from being slightly above average at best. I was willing to keep playing it because I was starved for Pikmin content. I can't imagine how painful it must be for people who have been with Pikmin for almost 20 years. Ignoring the close to completion comment, the lack of proper information on the next Pikmin game is very disheartening. I really don't want to be strung along by the faint hope that another game will eventually come out. I've already gone through that with Half-Life, and it hurts. It hurts so much. But at the same time, Miyamoto goes to E3 every year. If people want answers, all they have to do is ask. Ask again and again. Demand transparency, because as we know, even Nintendo is more likely to be transparent about projects than Valve. But 2 E3s have passed us by and nothing has been said about Pikmin. Is it a matter of really a passion project for Miyamoto? And even then, he has unfortunately stepped away from game development to become creative fellow for corporate Nintendo, supervising projects like the Super Nintendo World Amusement Park and the Mario movie. A new Pikmin game becomes less likely as the days go by, and all we can really do now is wait. If there's one thing I've learned from making this video, it's that Pikmin games must be very hard to make. All 3 games capture the feeling of isolation, resource management, and urgency in various ways. They portray war and the destruction of our planet differently. Coming up with a gameplay concept that conveys these feelings without compromising fun is exceptionally difficult, and I have to applaud the developers for trying. This is probably why it takes so long for Pikmin games to release. They take careful consideration to execute properly. If waiting means we'll get a Pikmin game that succeeds in conveying all this, while capturing the hearts of each game's specific fan bases, then that's fine. I want Pikmin games to be more like the first one, just like Pikmin 2 fans want the next game to be more like their favorite game, and etc. I'd like to believe they're cooking something up behind the scenes, but there's no way of truly knowing what's next for